Do I seem centered and a good focus and everything?
Looks
Lighting's
great.
okay?
Looks great.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll start. I'm Andriu Yanovski. I'm currently a master's student at University of New Orleans, and I'm interviewing the great Michael Pellera, pianist, educator, mentor. I guess so. I'd just like to start with kind of your background. You're from Albany, correct?
Yeah, I grew up in a suburb of Albany, New York.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to know, like, where you started musically playing, first teacher, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it's a smaller town than New York City or Boston, but there was a music scene there, and we actually had kind of I always called him R. Ellis Marcellus. He was a baritone saxophonist named Nick Brignola. And if you look him up, I mean, he's done a lot of records, and he was always in the downbeat pole. So he was a local guy, but he was kind of our inspiration to play. When he was probably like 15 or 16 when I started to get into jazz. Before that, I was kind of playing rock music, Santana, groups that had keyboards, The Doors. I really like. I always hated the Beatles, and now I love the Beatles. I said, why do I like all those dark bands always playing in minor? But and then I was, it's probably hard for someone of your generation to understand. Or there was a time where there was virtually no books on jazz improvisation, and the teachers of my father's generation, my parents' generation, they just didn't walk around saying Mixolydian mode and all this stuff and codify all these things that we kind of speak, so freely about now and so clearly about. So I was very hungry, and yet there was virtually nothing out there, So I was fortunate that there was a local pianist. Her name was Lee Shaw, and she became a mentor in life and almost like a second mother to me. So she lived in Albany, New York, and she had studied with Oscar Peterson, which was like my initial inspiration to play. Of course, I was so overwhelmed by his technique that I got very discouraged, and I went to the local music store and I told the man, like, of my plight. I said, this Oscar Peterson guy, I don't know what's going on here. And he says, you need to check out Horace Silver. So Horace Silver kind of became my man. That was the first time I was able to transcribe a solo and, learn a song. Tokyo Blues was the first song I ever learned on my own. And I would and later learned that Chick Corea transcribed all his solos and melodies. And if Chick Corea said it, I'm sure he did, everyone. But anyway, this woman, Lee Shaw, and she didn't speak the kind of language that I would later learn at Berkeley. Here's the scale, these are the chord tensions, and things like that. But she was a professional jazz pianist, and she was quite a very good singer too. She knew verses, and she could do that lush harmony. I wouldn't say she was a bebopper, more swing era, but very lush harmony like Oscar did. So we just talk more in terms of, you can put the sharp 9 and the flat 9, but not relating it to a scale. So she gave me a very rich harmonic start, which I'll always be grateful for. And she was really into always reharmonizing things. So that was a great start, And then when I went to Berkeley, it was called the Mixolydian scale, it was called the Dorian scale, and so it became something different. And that has served me well too. So I was glad to have those few years before I got thrown into the institutional.
So would you say she taught you more like by ear kind of stuff, or were you reading music with her, or how was
Well, she was classically trained, so it wasn't it wasn't by ear. And she would write lead sheets. I mean, I can remember learning All the Things You Are at 16 or 17. That's a long song.
Yeah.
And learning about the tritone sub, things like that. So no, it was pretty sophisticated. And yes, I wouldn't say a lot of reading two clefs and writing out the voicings, but yeah, she was not a primitive musician by any means.
Cool. Yeah. So then I guess we can talk about, so you went to Berkeley after this. So before then, at what point did you decide that you really wanted to pursue music, full time, that was going to be your career path?
Well, hearing that Oscar record, and I don't mean to sound blasphemous anyway, but it really was that thunderbolt, like, oh my God, this is something I have to do. Unfortunately, it was Oscar Peterson, but then I would gratefully find out, not everyone had that kind of technique.
That's funny, man.
Played that fast, so.
For me, it was Tatum, so it's the same. Yeah. It's the same thing.
And you realize when you're a kid, you just don't know about any artists, and that's another thing that Lee Shaw did for me. 1 week would be, here's Wynton Kelly, but it was always come back with something under your fingers. It wouldn't be like, excuse me, here's a transcription of Wynton Kelly, like we tend to do nowadays.
Yeah.
So, and from studying with Steve Mazikowski, he always emphasizes transcription. So, she expected you to come back with something. And 1 week would be like Thelonious Monk. I was like, who's this guy? This is some pretty wacky stuff.
Yeah.
She told me this funny story because she lived in New York in the 60s, how the one time she heard Monk, she went to the gig. You always hear these jazz stories where people are waiting, like certain people are on the stage. Chick Corea told a great story recently about the Miles Davis Quintet, how he went to hear him, and PC and Philly Joe were waiting, and then Wynton came in, and then finally Miles came in. Anyway, it was one of those. The bass player and the drummer are up there waiting, and she says it seemed like the longest time, and she said Monk comes in with his pants on backwards, does a little dance, jumps up on the bench, and just went into this flurry that she just couldn't believe, One of those great jazz stories.
That's cool. Man, I think one of the stories that I tell, I feel like you told me it was about Jack McDuff. And I think it was, you were saying you were like at this random club and there was this guy playing this rinky-dink little keyboard, but he was playing like
Well, I was the guy playing the rinky-dink keyboard.
Okay, it was you.
Yeah, I always tell that story.
Correct me on that.
If I'm in the right company, in the annals of in the vernacular of the day, getting piped. But
yeah.
So anyway, I get this bizarre gig. Okay, I'm living in Washington Heights, which is, upper Manhattan in the 180s by the George Washington Bridge. Mm-hmm. And somebody says, "Do you want to play a gig in Harlem?" Starts at 4 a.m. I was like, whoa. And, you would take the train through Harlem, but you didn't often get out at Harlem. And, I was always a little apprehensive about going to Harlem. I only had a couple times I went there, but they said, well, don't worry about it. The gig's like within sight of the 125th Street, station. And sure enough, it was there. So I get frisked by this giant linebacker looking dude. I was like, okay. And I realized that this is just like a private club, and people were doing some pretty illicit things, let's just say. So anyway, I get up there, and there's just a drummer and this funky Yamaha keyboard. I don't know why I remember the brand, but nothing like I ever played. And a trumpet player. So, start playing the gig, and I have to walk bass, and I was like, what's going on with this keyboard, man? It feels like a sponge, and so I'm playing it. Anyway, so this elderly guy comes up to me during one of the songs, and he's got a captain's hat on. I always remember that. And he said, and I had to ask him 2 or 3 times what he was saying. He was saying, "Can I have a piece of it? Can I have a piece of it?" So, and of course the trumpet player looked at me in a way like, this is a dude, man, let him play, So sure enough, he gets up there, and then they announce it. It's brother Jack McDuff. And I was like, oh, great, And he takes this funky keyboard, and I always remember his bass. He was like rotating his hand like boom, 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 and it swung so hard, and he just killed it, and there was a lesson there,
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, he made that keyboard sound amazing. So that was one of my brushes with greatness, but
that's fine.
Unfortunately, maybe at my expense that time. Fortunately, it was maybe not recorded.
I really think about that story a lot. Anytime there's like anybody's complaining about backline or wherever, I just think about that story and I think, man, you got to make whatever's work. It's in the fingers really more than anything. But there's.
I have one more just to show you how humble I am. Check out this one. You know who Lyle Mays is, right? Played with Pat Metheny for many years.
Okay.
Fantastic keyboard. I mean, equal to Pat. I mean, just a genius, And so anyway, I was playing at the Blue Note. This guitarist named Emily Remler, a close friend of Steve's and mine, and one of the people I met at Berkeley. And sure enough, he comes in, and he's going to sit in, and he is really brilliant, man. This wasn't like we were playing a bad piano. But I just remember he played an artist, and he just kills it. And he was kind of a homely guy, which is a cruel thing to say because he just died. And he had this gorgeous girlfriend. And she buys me a drink. I was like, oh, come on. You feeling sorry for me or what? But whatever. Say, buy me a beer. It's cool. But I mean, it was Lyle Mays. I mean, if Chick Corea walks in, I mean,
right.
Just be glad that you got there. But I mean, it was that killing. And he was the kind of guy, he did the Pat Metheny music. And you weren't used to hearing him playing a jazz standard and the Bill Evans, Keith Jarrett style. So that was another one.
That's always cool, man. I love that when you hear somebody who's typically in a context that's like, you associate them with like, fusion or whatever, and then you hear them and you can tell that they really have shedded, the lineage and the language, standards and all that.
And that's one thing I would say about living in New York. You would see people I don't know if let their guard down would be the word, but it's different when you're playing in a club. Well, first of all, these people who are traveling all over the world, they know it. When they play in New York, it's different. Their peers are literally there. But I remember a gig with Joe Henderson one time, and he had Joanne Rakeen, Charlie Hayden, and Billy Hart. It was this place called Lush Life. And they just played, for lack of a better phrase, real book standards. And some of them were his, like Inner Urge or Recording It. But the stuff like, I remember he specifically played Afternoon in Paris, which is a tune everybody plays, and some blues. And there was nothing ever said. He took the first solo, Joanne took the second, Charlie took the next, and maybe they threw it to Billy. And just to hear, I mean, you realize when you're an artist of that caliber, every record, you have to say something that, you know what I mean? And you have to be Joe Henderson or you have to be Michael Brecker, but you're in a club now. And, it was just great because they played multiple choruses. And I remember once, even my hero, McCoy, and I was like, well, I love that 60s era when he was with Coltrane, where he was playing standards, And I remember one time at the Village Vanguard, he was letting people sit in. And I remember them playing rhythm changes. And I was like, and he actually started to sound like a little bit like that early style. And I was like, oh my God, I know he wouldn't do that on record. You see what I mean? But he's doing it now. And I remember he did a trio song. I forget what it was, like Just in Time or one of those. Same thing. It was a little bit like, the earlier McCoy. But the other times I saw him, I saw him 2 times, and I'm talking grand pianos. One time in Carnegie Hall, 9-foot Steinway. Key went down and did not come up. 2 times. I mean, how do you break a key on a 9-foot concert? D is the 9-foot. I mean, and that was solo. I mean, I popped a few strings in my day, but that key went down, did not come up. And a second time when we were at Berkeley at the jazz workshop, but the key did not come back up.
Wow.
But they say he suffered in old age from that kind of just really intense playing, that he kind of took it to after the Coltrane thing,
That's
a lot of sound.
Yeah. Man, that's cool. So to get back more linearly, not that the
well, yeah, you let me go on my
story.
story.
No, that's what we're
like
here
my
for.
student says, he's telling the same story again.
I'll hear those stories.
I'll
hear those stories all day.
Okay.
So when you got to Berkeley, from all I know is that I believe you met Tork over there.
My connection in New Orleans was David Torkanowski, Steve Mazikowski, and this guitarist I mentioned, Emily Remler.
Okay, yeah.
Emily was from the East Coast, but Tork and Steve were from New Orleans. So, and Tork, as we know, has an unusual personality.
Yes.
And all I remember was there was this guy who studied with Errol Garner. That was his claim to fame. And I was like, I don't know what that meant. Maybe after a gig, he showed David a few things. But he studied with Errol Garner. Yeah. And they had a band and they were gigging. And then a few weeks later, no one would talk to Tork and enter me. And I became his best friend. The rest is history.
So, from what I've heard is that Tork wasn't really playing any of the New Orleans stuff while y'all were at Berkeley, and you hadn't really been exposed to that until he one time he showed you some record or something.
I mean, that was true. I mean, I knew nothing about New Orleans music. I didn't know about that side. I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't really know that he was that brilliant at the time, because of all the people that I'd met that I consider just natural geniuses, just comes to them.
Yeah.
Like Harry Connick, later on people like John Baptiste, or even Steve, just a natural player, And David is one of those guys. His bands can play any style of music. So you're right. He never played that music. I never heard it till I moved here in '77, and he handed me the record called New Orleans. It's called New Orleans Piano by Fess.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was recorded like '49 or something.
Yeah.
So that was like, another one of those thunderbolts. I can remember people from New York who came to visit me, and they go, "Aren't you playing jazz anymore, man? Why are you playing that?" A friend of mine, Chuck Loeb, he recently passed. Unfortunately, he was someone else we knew from Berkeley. And he was tight with Steve. Unfortunately, he died of cancer a few years ago. But he came down with Stan Getz, played at Rosie's, which was a club back then, still there. And he was like, "Aren't you playing jazz anymore?" I said, "Yeah, I play other styles. You don't like this stuff." He didn't get it.
Man, it's hard. Yeah, once, especially, as a piano player coming to New Orleans, like it was the same way for me. I didn't really know much about the history other than maybe a couple Dr. John, recordings I had heard. And then, it's like there's a whole world that's like, for people who know, they know, but otherwise it's like the best kept secret is this insane piano lineage of, even starting with like Fats Waller and then Fess and James Booker and Dr. John, it's like it's so deep, but sometimes you have to be shown that because other outside of it, nobody even knows about it or no one's checking it out.
And the New Orleans blues style is a piano style. And it's not by chance that it's played in C and F and G, or, it's always kind of designed so you could snap the black key to the white key on the minor third to major third. If you look at Dr. John, it's almost horrifying, but he does it. He'll go boom, boom, bing. I was like, is he really doing that? Like every time he just snaps but you realize that's kind of creating the accent for him, or whatever. But and plus, when you get a little older, you realize, you always think in terms of, well, they're from here, and we always talk about things in race or nationality, but you say, well, God, I've lived there for 40 years now. So maybe, something has seeped in. And if you're dedicated to something, you'll start to pick up on it, so, but I just always.
None of us were born none of us were born in the 40s, but we're still trying to play bebop, and
Well, people don't talk about it in terms of talent. Harry Connick was just this natural mimic, and it could be doing an impression of somebody, or it could be this kid can get the spacing of Monk's notes, which nobody can get. He could do that at 15. The next thing you know, he's playing the solo to One Finger Snap, has no idea what he's doing, but he's got it. He's got the feel of it. He's got the execution of it. And it's like, okay, how do you explain that? That's just natural talent,
Totally. So, what would you say, when would you consider like your first kind of big gig, so to speak, and how did you feel about getting that? And, what was the thought process going through your head while you were, doing it?
Well, I never had that kind of amazing career playing with the greatest artists. If I played with Joe Henderson, it was because he kind of came through town and we got to play with him at a master class, or you get to play with somebody at Snug. When I lived in New York, I did play some gigs with this guy named Nick Brignola that I mentioned. We would do little regional gigs and play with Rick Margitza for a while. And I went on the road with two of the big bands, they were just starting to tail off. I played with Woody Herman for a short time.
Yeah, I would consider that that's a big deal.
Well, those were things people of my era from the 70s, especially horn players. There'd be a lot of guys, who just want to be the third trumpet player, maybe not even solo, because it is an amazing experience.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think, I appreciate it as much as I should as a rhythm player, but a friend of mine named Jim Masters, we were on the Buddy Rich band in 1980, 81. And somebody just released a recording of a concert in Japan. And, it was like a board mix. It wasn't just somebody holding up a Walkman, and it's clean. And I was like, wow, that band really was as good as I thought it was. Not because of me, the rhythm section, but those horn players were tight. Because he was a really kind of vicious man. If he was in a bad mood, he would take out the hard. We never rehearsed. The first night we did he wouldn't even call a set. I mean, I was terrified. I was like riding the bus from New York to Virginia, looking at something as big as a Manhattan phone book, and like all kinds of lines going through it, and follow Buddy to here. I was like, what? This is the Buddy Rich band. It's not even written out that well.
Y'all didn't rehearse?
I mean, he didn't care. He just honestly, there was 7 new guys, didn't call a set, and didn't rehearse. We never rehearsed,
That's crazy.
And they said in the old days, he would always have a valet who was a drummer who could read, because he never read. I mean, he was a natural genius on the drums, but the drummer would play the music, and he had this crazy total recall. He could hear it 1 or 2 times and play it.
Wow.
And as the great Mel Lewis said, he says, well, when I play with Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, I accent the parts of the song I think, need accenting, and support. He says he plays the whole chart somewhere in his limbs. But anyway, I wasn't the greatest reader in the world. I mean, these guys were readers. I mean, really good readers, especially for the time. I mean, that's commonplace nowadays that you be a good reader, especially the New York musicians. But I just was worried about an exposed part.
Yeah.
And you had to be, if you were the scariest rhythm with this guy was a quarter note triplet on a ballad, because you're sitting there and you're going dun, 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 you think you got it metronomically. It was never like that. It would be like bang, bang. It's like, and the lead trumpet player's like looking at him. I mean, and believe me, once
it's on his time.
After the first time I got in the cracks, I had watched him too. Either that or I wouldn't even play.
Yeah.
But I said, if 16 guys are doing it, I can be the, one of them who doesn't have to do it, so.
Right.
But yeah, that was one of the strongest things I've ever been involved with. And, even though he was 64 at the time, I mean, when they would hit an end of 4, I mean, it was powerful. I mean, that's the closest I would ever get to playing in a real big band. And,
that's cool.
All the militaristic tactics that he used, fortunately I came from a Italian family of some pretty tough little Italians who would try to mess with you. And I wasn't, I wasn't the kind of guy that was going to tear up if somebody got in my face and did the gym coach. Why'd you shoot that layup? You lost the game.
Right.
Because he railed on me the first night. I mean,
really?
He went, because I didn't know the rule was, they didn't tell you the rules if you broke them, but he was doing his signature solo on West Side Story. And my mind was like, oh my God, I got up at 6:30 in the morning. I was up through all these charts. I'm looking at the audience. I'm looking at my shadow. And he stops in the middle of the solo and says, am I boring you? I was like, uh-oh. I was like, I got the feeling this is not going to be the last I hear of this.
Oh my God.
So sure enough, after the gig, lead trumpet player says, Buddy wants to talk to you. And he just went off. I mean, everything was MF this, MF that. You don't look at your MF hands. You don't look at the audience. I'm paying. You got it, MF. That was your name, MF, basically, for the first month. He never called you by your name. And I just quietly said, sure, buddy, no problem. And I had heard all these stories when I was in Berkeley. He was a karate expert. I mean, he was up to here on me. I was like, I ain't got to screw with this guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm 25 and he's 65. So, and he was Buddy Rich. So, I mean, when he played those solos, your jaw would drop. I mean, it was almost an optical illusion. And he had that showbiz thing, like, you bring it, man. It didn't matter whether you were playing for a high school, audience of 500 kids, or you're playing some big bowl. I mean, he brought it 1,000%. He had to change his shirts between set because he was dripping wet. I mean,
that's awesome, man. Yeah,
he was ready to play.
The real deal.
He could be a real nat. He could change. He could, next minute he wants to talk to the guys in the back of the bus, and then, then he snaps and start threatening to get an all LA band, and so. Oh, but it was a drill sergeant thing, and if he saw you had any kind of spine, that you weren't going to push it too far, but you could take it. He started to grudgingly respect you, But he unnerved some people. I mean, somebody told me once somebody was on the band, had a speech impediment, and the dude couldn't talk for a week. I mean,
oh my God.
He knew how to press. He would press those buttons if he knew you had them, and that's cruel. I mean,
Yeah.
You never want to be around anybody like that. Never.
That's got to, yeah, it's like a weird juxtaposition because on the one hand, it's this guy, Buddy Rich, who's, one of the OGs, and the way he plays, like you were saying, is so full of conviction and so intentional, so just like, I guess figuring out how to deal between like wanting to learn from the masters, but also like, feeling like everyone deserves respect in some regard. I mean, I know that's the story as old as time kind of in this music, starting with like, Papa Joe throwing the cymbal at Bird's head, but then it fed the fire. And so it's, yeah, I don't know did you feel like you've like found a reconciliation between that, or like, I'm sure you're now kind of an educator.
Maybe I didn't think about it at the time, but I feel like I have to tell young people, like, hey, I see you got this little vibe, and like, hey, you didn't insult me by pushing back, but I am old enough to be a grandfather, so why would you do that? You know what I mean? Even if I was wrong, because I'll be the first to admit, hey, I was wrong. Came on too strong, or I shouldn't have said it that way. But that's not going to do you very well in the professional world, especially if you're the drummer.
Right.
I said, there's a reason Brian Blade is as popular as he is. Plus it manifests itself in his playing. There's a reason people love Johnny V. Because he doesn't have a sliding scale on how he plays for people, and he wants to make your music sound good. We had Carl Allen here recently. He goes, first thing I do is I learn the guy's melody. I look at the chords, I really learn the music, I get on the gig, But, people talk about James Black, he was a hero of ours. I mean, he was a scary dude too, in a different way.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody used the word gangster in those days. But I mean, when Charles Neville got sent to Angola, James Black and James Booker were in the band, so that's gangster.
Right.
But I will say one thing, he never, just being these little middle-class white kids, I mean, he was way out of our league, and he never threatened anybody or anything, So, but he was a scary dude. You definitely wouldn't want to mess with him.
So I guess since you brought up Brian Blade, I mean, one of your first classes at Loyola was like basically with what became his fellowship band, right? I mean, or at least him and John Coward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another thing I tell young people, you're probably going to teach a lot younger, at a younger age, than my generation, like Steve Mazikowski and myself. It's just the way the music business is. Just like if you're going to be a performing artist, you're probably going to supplement your income with doing master classes and things like that. And maybe one benefit of the COVID is now everybody knows how to get online, you know what I mean? Whereas before it started, like, I've never been on Zoom or Google Meets. I never did anything. I don't have a camera that I can mount and look down on my keyboard. Now everybody has that. But, so I'm saying to them, take what you want from each of us, but you got to have some game, because, as students, when we bring these clinicians in, some of them really don't have much to say, or maybe you got a little bag of tricks and that's it, But there's a handful of people that they can keep it coming and coming. It's like, there's a guy named Jerry Burgonzi, I'm sure you heard of. Mm-hmm. And he's written like 6 volumes of these amazing books. I mean, I got a grant one time and got to know him pretty well. In fact, I got to play on a record with a friend of mine named Denise Mangiardi, great tenor player. Went to his house outside of Boston, sweet guy. Can get around on the piano, drums, and rips it on. I mean, he never runs out of stuff. I mean, you could show him Coltrane at the Vanguard and he'd break it down for you. And I've always admired people like that. The first person I ever met that could do that was a guy named Hal Galper.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows his name, but he played with Cannonball kind of after Zawinul.
Yeah, his video on how to practice, that's on YouTube.
He was the first guy. Yeah, very powerful man, big guy. Maybe slightly on the side of arrogance, saying, well, the Breckers weren't doing anything till they studied with me. It's like, all right, this is the guy I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But he was like, really showing you stuff, and he would just, listen to a recording of you and tell you what you need to do and send you on your way, and unfortunately there weren't a lot of people like that at Berklee. There was some good teachers, good at the theory, like there's the scale, and they're real good at big band arrangement. It's like, well, how do you sound like McCoy Tyner? How do you sound like Charlie Parker? they weren't able to do that. So I always thought of things that way, but if you've never taught, then you tend to get a lot of or somebody says, well, why does the 4 resolve to the 3? It's like so you get like a little bit of game. So I did kind of get thrown in the fire in 1990. I was 34 years old, and John Mahoney invited me to teach piano and do an ensemble at Loyola. And yeah, my first group of students, it was John, Matt Lemler, Peter Cho, and I'm blanking. But anyway, so Coward's really hitting on it. He's strong.
Yeah.
And you couldn't bluff these kids. You say, well, what are you working on? I'm working on Chick Corea playing on Bessie's Blues. Like, oh, wow, that's up there. You know what I mean?
Better go check that out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, I talk about Brian, all these prodigies I've met. Brian was not a prodigy, at least in the sense of the definition of a prodigy, like really being at a high level at a very young age. If we say, like Harry Connick was, or Troy Andrews. Brian was a good drummer, but I had a hotel gig at the Windsor Court for many years, and he would rush and drag, and like most drummers. Whereas someone like Joe Dyson, totally. Like, I was listening to a trio record I made way back when he was 17. It's his first time he recorded, and I said, look, go sit with Misha, who runs the Esplanade Studios. And I said, just sit at the board. Don't take all the time you need. Get the EQ the way you want it, And he played great on it,
Wow.
But Brian had something else going on. I would see Brian at Tower Records. And I said, what are you doing, Brian? He says, I'm writing down all the records I want to buy, And Brian was learning the melodies to the songs and the solos. He was absorbing music. And fortunately hooked up with John Vodakovich, who was a very drummer that, emphasized touch, floating time, the New Orleans grooves. Johnny had a unique skill set. A lot of people don't even think of Johnny as a jazz drummer anymore, which is like kind of insane,
Right.
Because he's one of the ultimate trio drummers, And so, next thing I hear, he's playing with Joshua Redman. And I read an article with Nick Payton. He kind of put it best. He just said something like, "Yeah, he didn't have this." Then he said he came back in 3 months. He goes, and he's pretty much what he is now. So that's what we're talking about. Some of the takes a little longer. Like Bill Evans, I'm sure he was being modest, would describe himself as a late bloomer. He said he even thought Miles Davis was a late bloomer. So, what the thing with Brian, he built it right, And I remember Brian Richburg, who is one of those prodigies, and one of the rare 14-year-olds that came to Noka. It's like, man, I can want bass with this kid. Everybody else is playing groove music, and they hear everything behind the beat. Excuse me, and it doesn't flow very well. But not this kid at 14, even though he came out of church and his father's a good. But I remember taking him to hear Blade, and we sit up in the gallery there at Snug, and maybe some of it was pride because it was Davey Mooney, and he had played the gig before. And you could tell that Brian didn't really know all the ins and outs of every arrangement, And, Brian was doing his Brian thing. All these subtle things. He'd have a brush in his hand and stick in his hand, and he'd switch to this, and he changed everything up. But no drum pyrotechnics, And I could see the kids not really getting it, But then a week later, Brian Richburg says, I need to get my touch together, Mr. Blair. So, and this kid was on such a high level at such a young age. He was able to assimilate it quick.
Yeah.
And he's also attracted to the more pyrotechnic side of drums and has the skill to do it. And of course, Herlin helped him. Everybody adopted him. Mm-hmm. Adonis spent a lot of time with him, all these people. So he built a style that was neat, but he got Blade after that, why does everybody in the world want to play with the guys? Chip wanted to play with him. Herbie wanted to play with him. Wayne Shorter. If any group is probably taking it farther than maybe even the Miles Davis quintet, it's going to be Wayne Shorter. So, but a lot of it is his personality, his philosophy, and how he built that foundation built on music and not drumistic stuff. because we don't care about drumistic stuff. I mean, sure, you love a flashy solo, but usually I hate drum solos because they always get tangled up or they don't have all that crazy drumistic stuff, So you're looking for, where is the beat? Is this person communicating with me? Is this person shading the music? Is this person creating dynamics that don't have to be broadcast? He does all those things, just like Vodakovich did it. He took some stuff from Elvin Jones and he put a style that no one's really ever heard before. And if you want him to do the New Orleans thing, he's got that. And if you want to hear him on those pop records, he's got that. He's played in church, so he's special, but he's that one person, to make it that big and say he didn't have that at 20,
That's cool, man. So, that's got to be, for you as an educator, that's got to be pretty inspiring, just as like one of your first examples of this can really happen. Like, hard work can beat talent, 9 times out of 10, if it really is pushed, hard enough. So I was wondering, does that serve as kind of an inspiration to students who maybe don't have the highest talent level when they come in, but they have the drive? And
Jason Marcellus always says a great thing. I don't know if I believe it, because I think at a certain point talent does take over, but he just says hard work beats talent 7 days out of the week, And in his case, extreme talent, probably really natural genius, and incredible hard work and attention to details. But yeah, I would say, the more I think I know something about human nature, I really don't. I can remember kids at Loyola, just were not doing any of the work, and then like call you up 3 years later and say, I'd like to take a lesson. I said, really? Okay. I remember this one guitarist. The next thing I know, he's got little graphs of Pat Metheny when he went up and down. He plays me a live recording of him playing I Hear Rhapsody. He's like killing it. I was like, now that I wouldn't have seen coming. But I think some of it just has to do with maturity and realizing, hey, I'm out in the real world. If you're teaching high school kids, you're saying, I think I might like this. I don't know what it is, but, and that first step is college, of course. Like, this is serious business, and New Orleans kids have to be careful because they know they're special. They know they come from a special environment. But you hear that kid from Idaho who's only playing along with his backing tracks, who can play Charlie Parker in every key, and he's killing everybody, They start to realize, wait a minute, this is serious business, The saddest thing for me compared to my generation with, Steve and Torkanowski is, we didn't expect to play with Freddie Hubbard or Miles Davis, unless we knew we got to that level, because that youth thing hadn't kicked in when we were super young. It didn't kick in until when then they were pushing youth. Mm-hmm. When they dropped Freddie Hubbard and Woody Shaw at Columbia Records to make room for Wynton, there's been a change. And I'm not saying anything against Wynton. Wynton ran with the ball and made the most of it, But I just worry that they don't have real life opportunities where, it means something to them. You're asking them to learn St. Thomas. And you say, it's not that hard of a tune. Well, sure, it's a hard tune. But if they were playing it every Friday, Saturday night, they'd want to go, and they made a recording of it, they'd want to go back the following week and play a little better. Whereas like now you're saying, I know, but you're saying you got to get to first base, and do what everybody else is doing around the world, like show up like you're doing it every night. And, it's like Pat Metheny said about 20 years ago. He says, you're going to see this new breed of super musician that has all this, at their disposal, the technology. And they're going to, if they want to learn a song like The Song Is You, they're going to get on and they're going to download 7 or 8 versions of it, maybe some transcriptions. They're going to internalize that song really quickly,
Yeah.
Whereas I'm old enough to remember, well, you got to go find a record of it, maybe steal some of your friend's stuff by making a tape. And then, for a while, people were, at NOCA, like librarians say, wait, your jazz kids are in here all the time. I go, yeah, they're copying every CD you have. And now he says, well, your jazz kids don't come by anymore. I says, yeah, because they can get on and Spotify and hear every recording known to man. They're uploading 20,000 songs a day, apparently, just on Spotify, So
yeah,
it's a different age we live in. But I just worry sometimes it doesn't have a relevance to their life, And I just say, hey, this could be it today. We're playing in room 221. play in room 221, like that's it. Like Art Blakey said, play like it's the last time. You're getting to play, and I said, and we don't get to play like this at this level. We play gigs where we have to figure out, playing at the Ritz Hotel. So what do they want to hear? They want to hear McCoy Tyner piano? No, they don't want to hear McCoy Tyner piano. They want to hear some bluesy piano, something that sounds palatable. Or, in New Orleans, you got to turn around and do your little fest thing in the middle of the set, because we're going to play so many styles that aren't played anywhere. And then they're going to do a trad tune. Like, don't play a bunch of bebop on Bourbon Street Parade, just like I'm telling the kids, don't play your bebop over. That's controversial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I ask every artist. We're doing a series called Trad Friday with Wendell and Herlin.
Oh,
and,
awesome.
Wendell's one of the person who, does skate that. Sometimes it kind of sounds like Clifford. Then, oh wow, that's some real Lewis stuff, or just the way he phrases makes it sound so. But to someone like Dr. Michael White, he might be horrified by that, because he's just such a purist,
Yeah.
So, anyway, but yeah, getting back to the teaching, yeah, they're all going to have to be teachers, and they're going to have to be good teachers, So take from everybody. Whatever suits your personality. But as far as what you asked before, yeah, I'm always learning about human nature. You never know what person's going to kick in at one point. You tend to think everything in terms of your life experience. Like, well, when I was your age, I went in my parents' basement and practiced for 3 hours a day. You didn't even do my schoolwork,
Mm-hmm.
But the next kid, it might kick in later. And, but the whole thing with the schools is pretty fascinating. I mean, just the level, and I just keep telling the kids at NOCA, like, hey, this is a university program. There's going to be university programs that probably never be as good as this. But, you almost have to go to one of those elite schools because we've already given you so much of the information. I mean, they haven't invented any new scales since, I learned it. But don't show up not knowing it. You know what I mean? If somebody says the modes of the major scale, you're going to go, oh, I said, come on, like, learn it,
Yeah. Man, I mean, NOCA in particular, I mean, for me as an outsider, someone not from New Orleans, I come in here and I see a lot of, quote unquote peers of mine or people older. And it's like, man, they've been learning on a high level, like you said, on basically a university level since they were 12 years old. And have, all this, not to it's just amazing. And I think that it's so vital. And so, I think everywhere should have a program like that. I don't think everywhere can, because the cool thing about the teachers at NOCA is that for the most part, I mean, like Mr. Severin and you, like it's people who have actually been playing the music and living that life, then coming and teaching it, from a young age. And it's invaluable. And that's got to be really special, both for you and for the kids.
Well, some people worry that it's going to get to the point where people are teaching it who never really played it.
Yeah, that's a big debate, probably.
That's always going to be a controversial thing. I mean, the thing I like about high school is you can just take it slower, because it's hard to cram this into an institutional environment. People want to see a syllabus. You're supposed to do something new every week, but that's not the way people really learn.
Right.
So you can take it much slower. You're going to remediate and remediate and remediate. Every time I get to a level 4, I just look at that particular group and just say, they need this, and that. I mean, one year, I had the best horn section I think we'll ever have. I had Miles Berry, John Michael Bradford, and Jeffrey Miller. I mean, these three, when somebody came in the building, like, hey, let's play a song, and you throw them up there with your latest 3-horner, and then they just killed it, charmed everybody. But like, we were really moving into something, that's very advanced. But this year might not be that. It's like, I don't think you all still know these modes or these scales, and you can't take 2 5s through the keys, and I'm just gonna do it has to be done, but of course you always get those little whippersnappers like, come on, man, like, why are we doing something new? And I said, hey, that's life. So if you you're going to have to go to Juilliard, you're going to have to go to NEC,
right?
If that's the level you're popping at.
I mean, the cool thing about New Orleans too is that outside of the curricular part, right? Like you said, you took Brian Richburg to Snug Harbor to go see Brian Blade, and like, you know, whatever instrument there is, there's somebody here playing on a really high level that is probably more accessible than if we were in, say, New York. You know, the highest level people over there, they're not dealing with kids. They're out on the road doing their thing. And a lot of them, despite being master musicians, there's something about New Orleans that's very like cooperative, I feel. I wonder how you approach that as an educator in New Orleans specifically.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's technically an outsider, you know, and the older I get, the more I feel like, hey, man, you are from Albany, New York, you know, and stop saying you all around your family because they think it's pretty stupid and funny, but even though it feels natural, you know. Yeah, I have to say to this day, I mean, you know, coming of age in the city was great. These are my real friends in life. I love the community spirit. You know, I mean, Herlin Riley invites kids to his house, and teaches them drums. Insane. You know what I mean? He doesn't say, "Hey, I'm Herlin Riley. You know, you need to pay me $100." You know, he invites them. You know, the Trombone Shorty Foundation. I talked about this series called Trad Friday. I mean, they're doing 6 classes for free, and Wendell Brunius is great. You know, I mean, they're very giving.
Yeah.
They let people sit in. You know, I mean, New York can be cold. East Coast can be cold. I grew up in that environment. You know, some people say you're East Coast, you're cold or whatever. You know, or you just tell it like it is. I mean, I don't know, but I do appreciate this community, and I would never take it for granted. And people are welcoming. And if you know, it's like I tell them, I say, hey, if you're the new young person and you're showing them that you're serious. And, you know, maybe you sat in last month, but you come back this time, you've learned the music. I said, but don't get up there not knowing the melody. That's just disrespectful. That's disrespecting the bandstand. That's what they call it. Mm-hmm. And they might cut you some slack and you didn't play the greatest solo in the world, but not knowing the melody and not knowing the basic chord sequence, you can't do that. You know, that's the toughest thing with teaching jazz. They think they don't have to practice. It's all improvised. I said, no, you work on the elements of your style. You know, even Chick Corea says, I know what I'm going to play. I just don't know how I'm going to play it. You know, I can remember reading, he just said he would analyze every 3 and 4 note pattern that fit each type of chord. I'm sure if he said that, he meant it, you know.
Yeah.
Because those guys are thorough. When he said, I spent a year of his life studying Herbie Hancock, he meant it. When he said he's learned every Horace Silver song and every Horace Silver songbook, you know, it's just, well, people do these, for lack of a better phrase, extraordinary things. What does extraordinary mean, you know? Mm. And you can't teach that. You can't teach desire. You know, you always have those kids, like, you get that vibe, like, gee, I wish I wanted to practice more. Or, I'm fine would you get together with me every, you know, Monday at 4 o'clock? I said, you know, put your metronome on and play your stuff. You know, find a friend who wants to practice with you, you know.
Right.
If you don't understand something, let's get together at 4 o'clock and talk about what you don't understand, but you have to do the work, you know. So, I mean, the saddest thing is, you know, I know a lot of these kids are falling in love with music. I just worry that they can't find a place. You know, I'll get back to what I said before. When we were young, we didn't expect to play with Freddie Hubbard or, you know, Wayne Shorter or Stan Getz, unless we knew we really got to that level. And you probably had to move to New York to even get in a position to get those gigs. Right. But we could play gigs. You know, we were professional musicians. We played on Bourbon Street, you know, back in Bourbon Street in those days. I mean, Ellis was doing those gigs when I first got here. But when Ellis played, you know, one of those songs, when it was his solo time, he sounded like Wayne Kelly. So that's the way you wanted to play those gigs. And if you got a solo piano gig, you knew you had to play tons of standards in a palatable way. And you were a musician. You were getting something out of that, you know. So that's the thing that bothers me. It seems like now it's either you go to the stratosphere or there's nothing, you know. So I just hope that everybody can find some way to fit in. And I also say play the music of your generation. I think jazz got a little snobbish at one point. You know, my generation, you were definitely going to play Stevie Wonder tunes and Beatles tunes, right, and whatever the pop tunes, you know, were of the day. Whereas a lot of people, you know, I said, if you go hear some hip hop band and there's a saxophone player doing it, so I guarantee it, that person probably played standards and you know, it's not like when you hear a, you know, old David Bowie record or Stones, you hear a slightly out of tune saxophone player that only played R&B. You know what I mean? it's going to be, ever since Mike Brecker started doing those sessions and David Sanborn and people like that. I mean, you expected that ripping solo within that context. You know what I mean?
That's really funny. I was just talking about that yesterday because we were listening to this David Bowie record. I was listening to this David Bowie record, and there was a saxophone there. And again, like you said, it was like this out of tune, like whatever solo. And I was like, man, I wonder how many sessions I just wish that was like Michael Brecker or like David Sanborn or even someone like Brad Walker around here. Like how, and that's funny that you bring that up because I was.
Well, some of them are Bowie himself, apparently.
Really?
But yeah, nowadays they're going to hire jazz musicians.
Yeah.
We're looking at somebody like Robert Glasper. I mean, the level he's at as a jazz player alone. Totally. So then when he brings that into these crossover styles, I mean, all the drummers are playing all the different styles. Yeah, you have to think of all the ways you could fit in. It's like I say with piano player. If you had a little, do you think you could play in the pit to Hamilton? Because that's a pretty high level of even classical chops. Totally. It's not just classical chops and reading. It's like, can you get in the pocket with that groove and everything? So a lot of classical players who read would not know how to do that. But, wherever you can fit into the music business, that's why I love when kids go to Berkeley. Some of those singer-songwriters who you're kind of laughing at, those could be the people getting publishing deals and getting out there. And you might be in their touring band,
Yeah.
So the widest spectrum possible. But play to that jazz standard because, man, when you get that gig and they want to play Autumn Leaves and all that stuff, you can't cram for that. That's how you keep, that's how you keep your technique in line. That's your dream playing, But I tell them, I say, hey, we rarely are in a position where somebody says, play whatever you want. Play your music, play it any way you want. It's usually, how do you be a professional musician? Go up there, figure out what the band leader wants. You might not agree with it. And, get along with everybody. If somebody says something that's remotely critical, don't be that pushback guy because you're not going to get invited back.
Yeah.
There's going to be too many people behind you that can do it. So the personality, it can really sink you. Like Chris Severin and I, we talk about that. We're about the same age. And New Orleans is just littered with brilliant people who just could not do the basics. Cannot show up on time, cannot keep their mouth shut on what's going to be played next, cannot, take over the gig and say, no, we should arrange it like, it's like, and I see that with the young kids. I see kids with that personality, and you try to quietly pull them aside and say, hey, be careful of that in the professional world. That could come back to get you. You don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it comes in handy that you guys have actual experience because that's something that you guys will notice off the bat and say, I've experienced this, I've been around this. Whereas, a lot of these what was the term you used?
Teachers teaching. I mean, teachers teaching teachers.
Something like that. Yeah, you use this term about like people who've just been in school forever. I forget what it was. But yeah, basically that it's like there's, this music, like, quote unquote jazz. And also, I mean, all music is really just an extension of life experience, right? So you got to have it well-rounded, in my opinion. So I think it's great that the kids are very lucky to have you and Mr. Severin and other people that are able to teach and notice all of those things, not just, what's in the book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think that's all I have for you. I don't know if you have anything more that you'd like to add.
No, I appreciate inviting me, and we can tell you more stories at the bar at Snug Harbor next time.
Yeah, no doubt. I would love to hear some. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Pellera. It's been a pleasure.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon. Hear you play.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.